Welcome, class, to another session here for our class at TESL Methods Language Arts. We're going to be in Chapter 2 and 3 this week. We're also going to be reviewing the article related to Christians and English language teaching. As you have noted with the article that you read from last week, there's obviously some controversy with some groups of people and what we as Christians do while teaching. So we're going to be covering that issue as well. We're going to start with Chapter 2 out of Nation's book here, Teaching Reading and Writing to EFL learners. We're also going to take a look at a couple examples of baseline curriculum. There may be some point where you're going to need to create a curriculum. You're going to go someplace and they don't have one. You'll need to develop one, and so we're just going to try to overview really quickly what some things look like, some components that you'll want to add. Actually, some of what Nation talks about in this chapter also is going to be useful for that. Let's begin by looking at what Nation's work in the learning process and the elements that are required for learning language. You need to recognize and spell words. He mentions a variety of prerequisites, one of them being understanding that there are some of the squigglies that we have are letters and shapes. And, where'd I put that? There it is. And that they need to understand what they are. As I showed you before in the video, Your Baby Can Read, that's one of the things that these little tots can do at a very young age. But if they don't have that knowledge, then it's going to be your job as a teacher to show them that. Phonemic awareness is going to be the same thing, that sounds can be broken down, that words can be broken down into sounds. And so they're going to need to understand that. Typically, that's not something that needs to be taught, but it is something that you need to be aware of, that they have to understand that you can break down those words into a variety of sounds. Another thing that's going to be a prerequisite are some writing conventions. If students are going to be able to read, they're going to have to know what those conventions are. For example, that words are separated by spaces, that we read from left to right in English. In other languages, it's right to left, or it's top to bottom. They may need to know about capitalization so that they realize this is the beginning of a new sentence. Not every language does that. So there are some writing conventions that they're going to need to know. There are also going to be spoken language and reading differences that they're going to have to take into account. So there are a variety of prerequisites even before you go into actually learn how to spell words and also read. All right. Nation then goes on to talk about phonics, which is very big in the public school system. Phonics is having to deal with the connection of sound to letter. In other languages, it's a great. Spanish, for example, I think is like 97 or 98% accuracy between sound and letter. So the vowels never change. In Spanish, the vowels are a, e, u, e, o. A, e, i, o, u. Sorry. A, e, i, o, u. And they're always the same. They never change, and so when you're trying to read in Spanish, it's rather easy to do after you learn those basics. English is not that way. The letter A can have several different sounds. And because it does, it makes it more difficult to understand that connection. But there is a sound to letter grapheme connection, and obviously students need to recognize that. They need to be able to read the link between the sound and the letter. And I'm certain if you have ever tried to teach someone a new language or teach a little tot how to read, that's a difficulty for them to be able to translate what it is they're seeing into some type of sound, right? So that's the reception. They need to be able to hear that as they read it. And then, of course, production. They need to be able to spell it. They need to be able to produce it. Deliberate and incidental. I do find this whole thing rather interesting. A lot of this comes about because of Crashonian ideas that incidental is better, that we don't need to be teaching them directly, and some would even say that we can't be teaching them directly. I will discount that immediately. Do I believe in incidental learning? Absolutely. Do I think we should do that? Yes, we should. However, especially with adults, they have the ability to reason. They have the ability to memorize and understand logically what things are. So I don't think we should deny that. So do I think we should be teaching deliberate spelling? Yes. Could we put it into things that are fun? Yes. But does it need to be incidental? No. We should be doing both. Again, I am the eclectic. And so when I look at what the Crashonian idea is there, I would say that's not going to be the way to go. That you should be having both. Actually, research by others as well, and Nation points this out, that research indicates that there is great advantage to deliberate learning. Again, we talk a little bit later down here about system learning and item learning. Should we be learning everything as a whole? The phrase I use is kind of an osmosis style of language learning, where you take the learner and you put them in the environment, or are you going to have item learning? You want to show them the discrete parts, kind of like the more traditional, where you show them the grammar components, you show them the grammar rules. It's interesting that this whole concept fits in music. There are some people, when they learn to play the piano, they learn the Suzuki method. And this is where they just put them in the environment, and there's not necessarily the learning of rules like it's been done traditionally in the West. But it's the same argument. Do we do the osmosis method? Do we do the discrete item rules learning method? My thought is you should do both. You should do the top down and the bottom up. They're both necessary. Some people prefer one over the other. Some people learn faster with one system over the other. Regardless of whether you're doing individual or the osmosis, you need to recognize that students need to have something that's meaningful to them. So that's going to be a key factor we'll talk about a little later. Right. So is it system or is it item learning? I think it should be both. What do your students prefer? If your students are very, very young, I don't think that item learning should be the priority, because they are going to have less capability in identifying the rules and regulations. But you can give them a lot of system learning. Now, from time to time, you may be able to delve into those minor things, but for the most part, you won't be able to do that. There's also the concept of high and low frequency word memorization, I guess you could say. Because there are so many words in the English language, high frequency words are typically memorized as a complete unit. When I say high frequency words, people have gone around, researchers have gone out and have done analysis of the most popular words, the most frequently used words. Those are the high frequency words. And you can go out and get lists of them. I'm certain that if you studied Spanish, you can get the book that said the 500 most popular Spanish verbs, or for example, you can go out and get books that say these are the top. You can get the list of the top 3,000 most frequently used words. You can get the academic word list, and there are a variety of places that you can go, which we're going to show you in later classes. Places online that you can go and find these lists and use them in your classes. If you're going to be developing a curriculum, I recommend you know what those lists are. Find some way to incorporate them. Now, when I say you're looking at lists, I'm really talking about the high-frequency words, which you'll probably want to have students memorize outright as a whole thing. Oftentimes, high-frequency words are irregular with their spelling. And because they're irregular, they're also not going to match the pattern that is typical, again, which makes it more difficult to just learn the rule. So you should memorize them outright. Low-frequency words oftentimes match a pattern. Something that ends with TION, for example. It's going to be easier for them to memorize those, not by memorizing the whole word, but just by memorizing the components in it, so that they can build it when necessary. According to Nation, the brain can only handle so many things that it can memorize, and so certain words, low-frequency words, are not memorized outright. So that when they read them, they don't just read it as a whole word. They have to look at the components. The same thing with writing. You have to look at the components. High frequency words are simply memorized as is. I love the work here that Nation and others are doing to talk about high-frequency vocabulary. I believe very highly in the concept of putting words together in groups that are related, that have some meaningful relationships so that they're easier to memorize. But this whole concept here of high-frequency memorization and low-frequency concept memorization is excellent research out of second language studies to help language learners better understand, better master the vocabulary section of language learning. So that includes the reception part, the reading part, and also the writing and or spelling part, as we're talking about today. So we've got system learning, the whole thing is a group, or we've got item learning. We've got high-frequency vocabulary, we've got low-frequency vocabulary. Hopefully I'll be able to talk a little bit more about how we handle high-frequency, low-frequency vocabulary when we're teaching them. Okay, and so let's move on. When you're doing spelling, when you're doing vocabulary, not just spelling, but also understanding the meaning of these words. Just as he had spoken before at the beginning of the chapter, we need to have meaning-focused input. So we're not just giving them lists of vocabulary. We're not just giving them lists of words to, try to remember, but it should be meaningful. You should try to put that list in some meaningful context. You're putting it into a story, you're putting it into a game, you're putting it into some communication type of activity, but it's meaning focused. The same thing when they want them to use it or spell it. That should have some type of meaning focused output. And so in those two emphases, you're really not doing a lot of focus on the language per se, but you're introducing them these words and trying to make them meaningful as they go about. In the last one here, language-focused learning, that's where you're going to be focusing more on the language itself. So you may be looking at prefixes and suffixes and maybe spending a little time trying to talk about sounds that aren't necessarily made, the silent E or something like that. There's more of the focus on the actual lexical components of words to try to help them understand how to get the spelling down. All three of those areas, again, are going to be necessary. So when you're trying to design a spelling program, just like anything else, Brown talks about using these three elements when you're trying to develop a spelling program. It should be affective. It should be interesting. It should be motivating. That's a huge word in my book. Research way back from the 1960s, even and up until now, indicates that people learn when they're in a language program. That's not the issue. The problem is that they don't want to come back. The problem is that it's not interesting to them. So we as teachers need to make language learning fun. It needs to also be meaningful to them. So it's something that they want to do. It's going to be something that's interesting, but it's also good for them. It's meaningful to them. Secondly, it should be cognitive. You should encourage students to do some processing of what these words are. Give them opportunity to practice with the words. You should have planned repetition with words. The brain can only memorize or put something from short-term memory into long-term memory after a number of repetitions, after a number of times of hearing and or using this word in context. So you need to provide those opportunities so that you can reinforce that in the brain, push things into longer storied memories so they can use them. So you need to show your students that information. You need to provide some training for them so they can learn how to do that. So we've got the affective. It's got to be fun or motivating or interesting, and it's also got to be meaningful. You've got the cognitive. You've got to get them to process the information. It's got to be used a variety of times in meaningful contexts. And you also have the social. It should be done in a group. It should be done so that iron sharpens iron. It should be done so that you can bounce off one another and see how it's used in a more live type of atmosphere. Also helps students to help one another. Helps students to be able to use the language and practice in a more controlled environment. Now you've got these three areas. When you're setting up a curriculum, you're going to want to look at these three areas as well. Something that you're creating, it should be fun, it should be motivating, it should be repetitive in such a way that it's also interesting to them, but it allows them to memorize better. And you should be doing some types of group activities to encourage that memorization and practice opportunities. Okay? Very good ideas and advice that are listed off of these. Learning to recognize and spell words. Obviously, you're going to have some type of a curriculum. Now, I'm going to be showing you a curriculum here coming up, actually 2 of them, just as samples. This is much more than just a spelling curriculum that I want to show you here. What I'm trying to show you is that you should have set guides for your classes. So, for example, this is a guide that I was working on at one point, and you'll notice that there are, you'll notice that there are objectives for this particular level. There are reading skills, there are writing skills, speaking tasks. There are grammar elements, listening elements, vocabulary elements. So that in this one particular level, students are supposed to be mastering these things. Now these are just the, mostly they're just the cognitive elements that are here. There is no affective and there is no subject, social. But they should also be here. So you're looking at these reading skills. These are things that they're going to have to be working on at this particular level. Speaking functions. They're going to be able to complete these functions. Or speaking tasks, right? There are things that they should be working on at this particular level. There are grammar elements that we're going to try to have them master. Now, does that mean that we focus only on the grammar? Do we do item learning here? Not necessarily. But the work that we're doing is so that they can practice and use that stuff. Okay, so they're going to try to get them to do that. We may have a test on this. We may have this in activities that they're going to be forced to use. They're going to focus on this type of thing. You as a teacher should be, when you're going to be setting stuff up like this, you're going to want to try to have a curriculum that includes, as we mentioned a little earlier, you moving? Thank you. The affective, the cognitive, which is mostly what I was showing you, and the social. The affective and the social weren't put in the little system that I set up there. Here's another one by WIDA, and they have an interesting setup here as well. Oops. Where am I? So they have core standards that students are supposed to be learning. This is level 6 for what do you call this? Upper elementary. And so these are the types of things that they're supposed to be learning and understanding. This, by the way, you can get off the web, so that you can get more off of this. You'll note that they're talking about more generic type of things, suggesting the revisions of written text through extended comments, okay, response templates, response journals, etc. And these are the things that they're going to want the people to be able to do at a particular level. But it's defined, and that's one of the things that I wanted to stress here. These are defined things that you can measure, you can test. They're also, this particular one has 5 levels, which means students know that they can progress from level 1 to level 2 based on what they're learning, based on their capability, their proficiency. There are a variety of other things that they put in here. There's the cognitive functions. There's the example of context and use that they have in breaking it down. Things are defined in such a way that students and teachers can know where the student is to be placed and when to move them up within the system. When you get to creating a syllabus, you'll want to have those elements. You want to have that baseline. What are the things that are necessary to build this particular curriculum? Maybe we go back down to all the way talking about spelling again, or vocabulary. What vocabulary should they master at this particular level? Or what vocabulary type of skills should they be mastering at this particular level? I do hope that you have an opportunity to look online for other types of curriculum. I will be adding some more to the website so that you can look at them also. There's also, I believe, a color information that you're going to be getting from a sample in your syllabus that you can also use. That's just for a lesson plan. But the lesson plan should also include some of those components that you should get from the curriculum, which should be used to build some of your ideas in your lesson plan. Okay, completely changing the topic. We're going to talk next lecture. We're going to talk about the article that you read about Christians in the English language teacher. So we're going to talk about that in a little bit. And for now, you guys take a break, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.